right. So we'll start adding the Selenium jar files in the project. Okay. Now the project is enabled. We can work with Selenium. So I'll make a new class. I'll make a new class called Selenium Basics. Okay. And yesterday I have talked about creating objects. Fine. I talked about how to work with Firefox, Chrome, IE and all. So if I create the object of Firefox, that is Firefox driver. Just give me 1 minute. Firefox driver equals to new Firefox driver. Okay, and you write on the next line driver.get to the URL gmail.com. So what will happen is that a Firefox window will open up. Fine, and hold on, and it will navigate to the Gmail page. Okay, so on this page, suppose I have to identify the elements. Fine, I need to identify username, password field, type in my username. So how do I do that? Okay, how do I do that? Hold on. Right. Now, yesterday I was talking about the page source. If you go to the page source of Gmail, you will get the complete information about this page. Now, Selenium works on this page source. Page source has got nothing but HTML language in it. Okay. Now, while working with Selenium, you will have to analyze this page source about it. Right. And in Firefox, fine, they have this tool known as Firebug. With the help of this, you can actually analyze your page source. This is Firebug. I have already installed it. If you want to install Firebug, you can simply go to Google and type download Firebug. Make sure you do this in Mozilla. Right? You download Firebug in Mozilla. It gets add-on. It gets installed as an add-on inside Mozilla. So you can click on this Add to Firefox button, which is out here. Okay, and it gets installed as an add-on in Mozilla. And it's a request, please keep yourself on mute. Okay, so now once you add this into Firefox, you will get this icon on the top, this one. Okay, this is Firebug. It helps you to analyze the page source. Right, now if I click on this arrow, this one, this arrow out here, and if I move my mouse anywhere on the page, you will start getting the page source. Okay, now in the page source, this is the page source. Right, now every element has a tag name. For example, out here the tag name is section. Class is an attribute associated with this tag. Fine. Every element on an HTML page has a tag name and set of attributes associated with it. With the help of tag name and these attributes, we identify objects. Right. The same thing if I have to do it in Chrome, right? Like I talked yesterday, you will have to hold on. You have to set the system property and then initialize Chrome driver. Right, you have to initialize Chrome driver, and when you run this code, Chrome will open up. Fine. So if I run this, yeah, Chrome opens up. You see that, right? So in Chrome, if I have to investigate any element of the page, you right click on the page and select inspect element. You don't need to install any add-on, you don't need to do anything in Chrome. It is inbuilt, it's known as Chrome Inspector. Okay, you right click inspect element and you get the element out here. Or you hit F12 of your keyboard. When you hit F12, you will get the Chrome Inspector. Right? I request you to please keep your mic on mute. Fine, please don't unmute your mic. Okay. Now, similarly on I as well, if you have to investigate the page, the shortcut is F12. Open your website and hit F12, and I inspector will open up through which you can investigate the page source. Right. Now, suppose like I am on the Gmail page and I have to enter the username, password, and sign in. Right. How can I do that? To do that, you need to first understand the HTML language. Fine. You need to understand HTML language. So I'll talk about HTML now. Right. Now in HTML, like out here, you have this username field. Fine. This username field has got an input box. Like if the tag name is input, and these are the attributes. Fine. So every web component, this is my web component, or technically we call it object. Technically in automation, we call objects. A text box is an object, a link is an object, a text field is an object, right? Everything is an object. Technically, we call it an object. So object, suppose the object is a link, right? What else you have? You have got text box on the page. You have got a radio button. You have got a normal button on the page. You have a checkbox. Then you have drop list. Then you have got images on the page. Alright. What I'm trying to tell you about HTML over here, because to learn HTML is important. Okay. If you have knowledge of HTML, it becomes very easy to identify objects. The main challenge is identifying the objects with which you have to work. Right? Only then you will be able to automate them. Right? So to identify the objects, you need to know HTML language in detail. Right? Then you have got normal text on the page. Fine. Apart from this, web tables are also present on the page. Then frames are also present. So I'll talk about them later on. But right now, I'll talk about these things. Fine. Now, these things have set of mandatory attributes and a set of optional attributes. Okay, every object will have a tag name, a set of mandatory attributes and a set of optional attributes. From where do we get these things? We get these things from the page source. Okay, from the page source we get these things. Right now, this is the text field. Fine. A text field will always have the tag name as input. Always. Fine. If you go by a link, if I go by any link on the page, like this is a link about Gmail, then a link will always have anchor tag. Many of you might be knowing this. A link always starts with an anchor tag, right? With a link, you will always find an attribute called href. Href attribute always points towards the URL which will open in case you end up clicking on the link. So if I click on the link, I'll end up opening this URL. Okay, so href is a mandatory attribute in every link. In every link, the tag name will be A and mandatory attribute will be href. Right? I'll just increase the font size. Okay, now 1 minute. Right. In case of a radio button, fine, the radio button will always have the tag name input. A normal button on the page, like this is a sign in button. Okay, sign in button also has got the tag name as input. A checkbox, like this is a checkbox on the page, right? The checkbox will also have the tag name as input. So remember, in case of a text box, a radio button, a normal button and a checkbox, the tag name is always input, but set of mandatory attributes, they vary. For example, in case of a checkbox, these are all the mandatory attributes, but in case of a checkbox, you will only find that the type attribute will always be there and it will be equal to checkbox. Right? So if the tag name is input and the type attribute is equal to checkbox, then a checkbox will be made on a page. Fine. So always remember that in case of a checkbox, the type attribute is always equal to checkbox. Fine. In case of a normal button on the page, like this is a sign in button. Okay, this is a sign in button. The type of this button will always be equal to submit. Right? So the type equals to submit. If we have type equals to submit, then this will make it a, we can say, a button. Right? Now in case of a radio button, if the type is equal to radio, then it will be radio button, and in case of a text field, the type is equal to text, it will be a text. So for all these tag names, the mandatory attributes are different. Right? In case of a drop list, okay, for example, This is a drop list on this page. It's got various countries, right? So if you look at this drop list, observe this, then the drop list will always have the tag name as select. Okay, so drop list always has got a tag name as select, right? There is no mandatory attribute in drop list, no, nothing, right? And in case of an image, for example, this is an image Google. The image has always got the tag name as ing. Okay, the tag name as ing, and there is an attribute source. This source attribute tells the location. This is the location from which the image is getting loaded. If I copy this location, paste it over here, hit enter, you will see this image coming. Fine. So image has an attribute source which is mandatory. It tells you the location from which the image is getting loaded, right? In case of a text, there is no fixed tag names. Text can be inside a div, span, para tag, right? You know there is no fixed tag name, no mandatory attribute for normal text on the page, right? So okay, I'll give you the invitation. Right. Fine. Now about the optional attributes. Okay, optional attributes can be there, they cannot be there, but if they are there, they make our lives easy. For example, optional attributes are like ID, class, name. Generally, these are the three optional attributes, and they can be present with any object. Okay, generally, the ID is supposed to be unique. ID and name. ID and name are supposed to be unique attributes which specifically give the object an ID or name so that we can identify it. For example, on the Gmail page, this is the username field. Okay, the ID of this field is email, right? So if the developer is given an ID, generally the ID is supposed to be unique. So I can easily identify this object based on the ID and work on it. Fine. Okay. So otherwise, if it's not there, then there are other ways as well. Okay. So right, I did put a limit of 25 days today as well. It really becomes difficult. I was thinking after the class, it becomes difficult to manage people. The bandwidth is also there, bandwidth constraints, right? So now, all right, fine. So if I have to identify the element, fine, the element in the username field, right, and I want to type in something inside it. So I can identify this element with the ID. Okay, I can identify it with the ID very easily. Fine. So now what I can do is I'll show you. I'll go to seleniumx2.org. Okay, and if you go to the documentation, right, or you go to download section, and if you look at the Java doc, right, so how do I go and identify this element on the page right? Uh, whose ID is this, or if it's a text box, or what do I do? And the question arises, if I've tested my script on all the browsers, if I've tested on Firefox, Mozilla, Chrome, right? Are the commands different on all the three browsers, right? Will the ID be different on all three browsers? If the ID is same on all the three browsers, will Selenium code be different? The way we identify an object in Firefox, is it different than the way we identify the element in Mozilla? Sorry, Chrome, right? Or IE? The answer to this question lies again with Java. Okay, so before I proceed further and I tell you how to use these tag names, mandatory and optional attributes, I need to tell you about the concept of interfaces in Java, right? If I tell you about interfaces, only then I can move further. Okay, so I will create a new class or a new interface. Now, what is the interface? In layman's term, interface is just like something which gives you an overview of what the application is supposed to do, right? For example, when you open up a book, right? What do you see in the very beginning? You see the index page. In the index page, you have got all the chapters and modules listed down, right? So that is an interface. Or a very good example is, if you go to my site, you are interested in training, you go to my site utbselenium.com, and then you click on Selenium Tutorial, and then you get this page. Okay, on this page, this is the interface for my training, right? I have told that this all will be covered in the training, but you as an end user, you don't know how this is implemented. Okay, you as an end user, you only know that this all will be covered in the training, right? So what we have out here is something like this, that is, I'll create a new interface, say interface bank, fine, and inside the interface I will just write function like public void transfer, public void receive, fine. So these are the two functions which any bank is supposed to perform, right? And suppose if I make a class called as SSBC, then HSBC is a bank, right? So technically we write it like that: HSBC implements bank. When you say HSBC implements bank, you tell that it is implementing all the features of the bank class. It is in a bank interface. It is implementing transfer and receive functions. Transfer and receive functions are not implemented in the interface. Interface is just like a short story which tells you what the application is supposed to do, right? Now in the HSBC class, if you write implements bank, you will have to implement both the functions. If I move my mouse over this error, you will get the option add unimplemented methods. When you click on this, the unimplemented methods from the HSBC class are added inside this. Okay, and this is the transfer and receive function. These are two functions. Okay, now bank is an interface. Fine. Transfer and receive are functions, right? If I omit any one of them, I get an error. This is because if the class is implementing an interface, then it is supposed to implement all the functions of that interface, right? Now, in the transfer function, if I print system.out.println transferring money, and in the receive function, I will write receive money. Okay. Now, what is this override? This override is like a tag. It's not mandatory to have it. You can remove it as well. This tells you that this function is actually coming from the bank interface. This function is present in the bank interface and HSBC is implementing it. So that if a layman looks at this code tomorrow, suppose somebody else looks at it tomorrow, by looking at this annotation, technically this is known as an annotation. By looking at this @override annotation, you will come to know that fine, this function is coming from the interface. Okay, right? Similarly, if I have got another class called city, like Citibank, which also implements the bank interface. Okay, so it will also have to add the unimplemented functions. It becomes mandatory. And in the functions, you can write system.out.println city implementing or city transferring, right? And out here I can write city receiving money, right?